There's a piece of land in Surfside, Florida at 8-77 Collins Avenue, 1.8 acres, on the Atlantic Ocean, one of the most valuable waterfront lots in the United States and the most contaminated address in American real estate history. Not contaminated by chemicals, not contaminated by industrial waste. Contaminated by what happened there on June 24th, 2021, at 1:22 in the morning, when the Champlain Tower South, a 12-story condominium building with 136 units, collapsed in 11 seconds, without warning, while 98 people were sleeping inside it, the deadliest accidental structural collapse on American soil since Oklahoma City. In 2022, a Dubai billionaire named Hussein Sajwani paid $120 million for that land. As the sole bidder, the only person in the world willing to write a check for the ground where 98 people died, he paid $120 million. He hired Zaha Hadid Architects, one of the most celebrated design firms on earth. He announced a 12-story building called the Delmore, 37 units, described as mansions in the sky. Average unit size, 7,000 square feet. Starting price, $15 million, a private restaurant, residential butlers, a wellness spa, resort-style amenities. Unlike anything the area has seen previously, the developer said. Sales launched in January 2025. The sales gallery opened in May 2025. As of April 2026, the Delmore has not sold a single unit, not one. 0 contracts signed, on land that cost $120 million, for a building designed by the firm of the late Zaha Hadid, starting at $15 million per mansion in the sky. In a real estate market where $4,400 per square foot units in Surfside sell regularly, 0. The senior vice president of development at DIMAC told Bisno in April 2026, a lot of the feedback we had was that a lot of people did not want to be the first purchaser. That is the beginning. This is the rest of the story. Here is what the press release announcing the Delmore does not explain. When DIMAC International issued its press release about the Delmore project at 8-77 Collins Avenue, the release described a world-class luxury development. It described Zaha Hadid Architects. It described the 37 mansions. It described the amenities. It described the pricing. The press release does not mention the collapse, not once. Not a single reference to the 98 people who died at 8-77 Collins Avenue on June 24th, 2021. Not a sentence acknowledging the history of the address. Not a line about the $1 billion settlement paid to victims' families. Not a word about the 40-year building inspection that was underway when the building fell. Not a reference to the NIST investigation into what caused the collapse that is still ongoing in 2026. The press release describes the location as if it is a pristine oceanfront site waiting to be developed, which is, in the real estate sense, exactly what it is, and which is, in every other sense, exactly what it is not. A lot of the feedback we had was that a lot of people did not want to be the first purchaser. That statement, from the developer's own senior vice president of development, is the most honest thing DIMAC has said publicly about the Delmore. It contains the complete explanation for 0 sales on a $15 million product in one of the most expensive real estate markets in the United States. The people who can afford $15 million for a single unit do not want to be the first to say, I bought a home where 98 people died. And no amount of Zaha Hadid architecture, no quantity of residential butlers, no number of square feet in a wellness spa changes the nature of what that first purchase represents. This is the story of the land at 87 Collins Avenue, what it cost, what was built on it, what has been attempted on it since, and what the market for mansions in the sky at the site of the deadliest residential collapse in modern American history has produced. Start in 1981, Surfside, Florida. A 12-story concrete building called Champlain Tower South is completed at 8-77 Collins Avenue. 136 units, oceanfront. Surfside is not, in 1981, what it will become. It is a quiet barrier island community between Miami Beach and Bal Harbour. The residents of Champlain Tower South are middle class and upper middle class, retirees from the Northeast, South American families with Miami connections, some full-time residents, some seasonal, some investors renting to tenants. The building is well located and well regarded, the kind of solid, functional residential tower that defines the South Florida oceanfront inventory of the 1970s and 1980s, built with the technology of its era, to the code requirements of its era, on filled coastal land, above a water table, that rises and falls with the tides, exposed on its south and west facades to pooled water from the pool deck above the parking garage. The pool deck waterproofing, that is where it starts. Not in 2021, not in 2018, in 1996. In 1996, a structural engineer named Frank Morabito is hired by the Champlain Tower South Condo Association to perform a study of the building. Morabito writes a report. The report identifies major structural damage to the concrete slab below the pool deck. It identifies cracking and spalling of concrete columns, beams, and walls in the parking garage. It identifies failing waterproofing below the pool deck as the primary source of water intrusion into the structural system. It recommends repairs. It estimates the cost of repairs. The report is filed. The association discusses the repairs. The repairs are expensive. The repairs require special assessments. Some owners cannot or will not pay. The discussions continue. For 25 years, the pool deck sits above the concrete slab. The concrete slab absorbs the water from the pool deck. The water finds the rebar. The rebar corrodes. The corroding rebar expands. The expanding rebar cracks the concrete that encases it. The cracked concrete no longer carries the load the way the engineer designed. The column that is cracking is carrying the weight of 11 floors above it. It carries that weight for 25 years, through the South Florida humidity, through the salt air from the Atlantic, through 25 years of tidal groundwater cycling beneath the slab, through 25 years of pool water pooling at the waterproofing failure point, through 25 years of association meetings and special assessment votes and deferred decisions and cost estimates that kept climbing, and owners who had paid for a retirement home in the Florida sun and did not want to write another large check. On June 24th, 2021, at 1:22 in the morning, the check came due in 11 seconds. Here is what the $1 billion settlement does not explain. The settlement was extraordinary by any measure, $1 billion, for a 136-unit building whose market value before the collapse was a fraction of that. The money came from 37 different sources: insurance companies, engineering firms, the developer of the adjacent 87-park luxury tower, whose construction is suspected by some investigators of contributing to the structural damage through vibrations and groundwater management, the municipality, other parties. 37 sources assembled over months of litigation before a Miami-Dade Circuit Court judge named Michael Hansman. Judge Hansman managed the Champlain Towers South litigation with a combination of efficiency and moral clarity that became the standard against which every subsequent South Florida building collapse legal proceeding is measured. He pressed for speed. He pressed for transparency. He pressed for a result that would give the families certainty and move the case out of the legal system. He also pressed for one thing that the victims' advocates did not want. He ordered the land sold. Not memorialized, not preserved, sold, because the land was an asset of the estate, because the sale proceeds went to the victims' families, because the land was worth what it was worth, $120 million, and that money belonged to the people who had lost everything. The advocates who wanted the site converted to a memorial had a legitimate moral argument. Judge Hansman had a fiduciary one. He ruled. Damac placed the only bid, $120 million. No government agency, or not Miami-Dade County, not the state of Florida, not the town of Surfside, placed a competing bid. No one offered to buy the land for a memorial. Damac was the sole bidder. They paid $120 million. The proceeds went to the families. The land went to Damac. The families got their settlement. Damac got the most psychologically complex piece of real estate in the United States. Stop here. Because what a developer faces when they attempt to build luxury housing on the site of the deadliest residential collapse in modern American history, and why zero sales in a $15 million luxury market is not a pricing problem or a market problem or a design problem, is the part that no real estate press release has ever fully addressed. Here is what buying an apartment actually is. In the United States, purchasing a residential unit is the single largest financial transaction most people make in their lifetime. For a $15 million unit, the buyer is not most people. They are someone for whom $15 million is a discretionary decision. They have options. They can buy in Palm Beach. They can buy in Fisher Island. They can buy in Coconut Grove. They can buy in Manhattan. They can buy in London. They can buy in Monaco. The buyer of a $15 million apartment does not need to buy at 87 Collins Avenue. And the decision to buy at 8777 Collins Avenue is not primarily a financial decision. It is a social and psychological one. It is the decision to make your home at the address where 98 people died. To sleep in a building on the ground where those 98 people were buried in rubble, to have that address on your correspondence, to explain to guests where you live, to be in the social world of South Florida, billionaires, where everyone knows everyone's address, the person who bought at the collapse site. The Delmore's senior vice president said it plainly. A lot of people did not want to be the first purchaser. Not the only purchaser, the first. Because being first means being known as the person who bought first, who made the statement that the address was acceptable, who decided that $15 million Zaha Hadid architecture and residential butlers were sufficient distance from June 24th, 2021. No one has decided that. Not in 16 months of marketing. Not after the sales gallery opened. Not after Damac, according to sources cited by The Real Deal, had contracts nearly executed, more than $200 million worth of units nearly under contract. before DAMAC itself declined to proceed because of concerns about the source of the funding. DAMAC turned down $200 million in nearly contracted sales for compliance reasons on a site that has since sold nothing. That is not a market problem. That is the specific gravity of 80-77 Collins Avenue pulling on every decision made in connection with it. Here is what the Florida condo market's collapse does not explain. In South Florida, the post-Surfside legislative response, Senate Bill 4D, the milestone inspection requirements, the structural integrity reserve study mandate has produced what market analysts are calling the condo cliff. Approximately 1 million condominium units across Florida are subject to the new rules. 3/4 of all the condo units for sale in Miami, Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach counties are more than 30 years old. Those buildings face inspections whose findings must be disclosed. Reserve studies that reveal how much money the association does not have for repairs that are now mandated. Special assessments to fund those reserves. Assessments that, in some buildings, run to $50,000 or $100,000 per unit. For owners, many of them retirees on fixed incomes who paid $200,000 for a condo in 1995 and have no additional capital to spend, those assessments are not a financial inconvenience. They are an ultimatum. Pay the assessment or sell. And selling a condo in a building that now requires disclosure of its inspection findings, that has a 6-figure special assessment pending, that is showing structural concerns identified by the mandatory engineering review. Selling that unit is not the straightforward transaction it was in 2020. It is a transaction that requires disclosure of everything the inspection found. To a buyer who, post-Surfside, is acutely aware of what an aging coastal building in South Florida can do at 1:22 in the morning. UBS identified Miami as the real estate market most at risk for a bubble burst in its 2024 analysis. The specific risk factors: the post-Champlain laws, rising insurance costs, and a large inventory of pre-inspection buildings coming onto the market simultaneously. In the summer of 2024, sales of older condos in South Florida were down 21.5% year over year. The average price was down 2.4%. Those are the aggregate numbers. The specific numbers for individual buildings where the inspection found serious structural concerns, are far more dramatic. This is the condo market that the Delmore is trying to sell into. A market where older buildings are being discounted because buyers know what the inspections are finding. A market where even pristine, new, beautifully designed luxury units are struggling if anything about their address creates hesitation in the buyer's mind. And the Delmore's address creates more than hesitation. It creates the specific, documented, publicly recorded, court-litigated, settlement-verified history of the worst residential collapse in modern American history. Both things are true about 8777 Collins Avenue. By any measure of location, design, and amenity specification, the Delmore is a legitimate luxury product. 1.8 acres of direct oceanfront on the Atlantic in Surfside, Florida, a market where comparable land does not come available. Architecture by Zaha Hadid Architects, the firm of the only woman to have won the Pritzker Prize, whose posthumous design legacy produces buildings that are immediately recognizable globally. 37 units averaging 7,000 square feet at a price point that places them among the most exclusive residential offerings in the United States. A developer, DAMAC Properties, with a portfolio of tens of thousands of successfully completed residential units across the Middle East, Europe, and the United States. A $120 million land acquisition that was, by every market metric, a rational investment decision made on the assumption that time heals all addresses, and that $15 million buyers in the world's most liquid luxury real estate market would eventually focus on the views and the architecture and the amenities rather than on the history. And 8777 Collins Avenue is also the site where Champlain Towers South stood for 40 years, before collapsing in 11 seconds on June 24, 2021, where the pool deck waterproofing had been identified as failing in 1996, where a structural engineer had written a report recommending repairs that were deferred for 25 years, where the rebar and the concrete had been corroding, slowly, silently, invisibly, for decades, where 98 people were sleeping when the columns that had been compromised for a generation finally ran out of whatever structural integrity remained, where the $1 billion settlement that followed required the land to be sold to provide the families with certainty, because certainty was all Judge Hansman could offer, where justice could not reach every party that bore some share of responsibility, where DAMAC paid $120 million as the sole bidder, where Zaha Hadid Architects designed 37 mansions in the sky, where sales launched in January 2025, where the sales gallery opened in May 2025, where 0 contracts have been signed as of April 2026, where a developer's senior vice president confirmed publicly that people did not want to be the first purchaser, where DAMAC turned down $200 million in near-contracted sales over funding compliance concerns, where the NIST investigation into what caused the building to fall is still ongoing, where the market has spoken, not with one voice, not in a press release, but in the most precise possible language that a real estate market uses. Silence. No signatures, no first purchaser. The mansions in the sky are waiting for buyers who are willing to be first. The Atlantic is still there. The views are still there. The Zaha Hadid architecture is still in the rendering. And the history of 8777 Collins Avenue is still there too. Exactly where 98 people left it on June 24th, 2021. At 1:22 in the morning, 11 seconds, no buyer has decided that $15 million in residential butlers and a wellness spa is enough distance from that history. Not yet. Both things are true. The most expensive oceanfront lot in Surfside is for sale, and nobody wants to be first.